When a loved one goes missing, those left behind often fear the worst. But no one could have imagined the dark truth that lay behind Shannon Medill's disappearance. Her husband, Joshua, seemed like the perfect husband. He helped with the search, supported the family, and begged everyone to hold on to hope. But what if it was all a deception, and the real threat had been hiding in plain sight all along? Shannon's body was buried just a few yards from where they had once made plans for their future. How could someone who swore love and devotion turn it against the very person they claimed to cherish? What drives a person to make such a terrible choice? And what if it wasn't just a tragic mistake? What if it was premeditated? Can you really trust someone who says they love you? Or is there always a hidden danger behind those words? The evening of November 2014 was the moment that shattered the Medill family's world. Shannon, a young actress from Alberta, had just landed a long-awaited role, the very break she had worked so hard for. She had planned to meet her brother, Brett, at the theater to celebrate this achievement, but her seat remained empty. At first, Brett didn't think much of her being late. He assumed she'd been held up at rehearsal or had some last-minute details to take care of. But as the evening turned to night and Shannon still hadn't shown up, Brett's worry started to grow. He called her repeatedly, sent messages, left voicemails, but got no response. As the hours passed, his concern deepened, but there was little he could do but return home with a heavy heart, unsure of what to think. The next morning, Brett's anxiety only intensified. He tried calling his sister again, but her phone was still silent. Desperate, he contacted their parents, hoping for any information. But they were just as baffled. Shannon's mother tried to calm herself with rational explanations, thinking perhaps Shannon had been caught up in a last-minute filming schedule change or was working a night shift. After all, her acting career was full of unpredictable hours. She even told herself that Shannon might simply be sleeping after a long night on set, unable to hear the phone ring. But deep down, none of these explanations seemed to fit. As the hours passed, the family's fear grew, and soon they would uncover a reality far darker than any of them could have ever imagined. Even these explanations seemed far-fetched. Shannon had always been responsible and made an effort to stay in touch, especially when a new opportunity for her career was on the horizon. She wouldn't have simply ignored all the calls and messages. To calm her growing anxiety, Shannon's mother sent another voicemail, assuring her that they weren't upset about her absence and just wanted to know she was safe. Unfortunately, this message also went unanswered, and the feeling that something was terribly wrong only grew stronger. Soon after, 6 members of Shannon's family, including her husband Joshua, arrived at the police station. They knew Shannon was supposed to travel from Edmonton to Calgary and feared she might have been in an accident. They urged the authorities to begin a search, but the police responded with indifference, stating that as an adult, Shannon had every right to go wherever she wanted without informing her family. However, the family continued to plead with them, emphasizing that Shannon had never disappeared for this long and that her absence was completely out of character. After much persuasion and emotional conversations, the police finally agreed to check local hospitals and begin a search operation. But no results came. No hospital had reported any accident involving Shannon. Days began to blur into one long stretch of waiting and worry. Her family had no idea how to cope with the uncertainty and the silence. During this time, Shannon didn't use her credit cards, make any purchases, or show up anywhere with her car. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. What was perhaps most concerning was Shannon's complete absence from social media. Normally, she was very active on her blog, sharing both her successes and setbacks, posting updates about auditions and shoots. But this time, there were no new updates, no posts, just a haunting silence. This only added to the fear and uncertainty in the hearts of her loved ones, who remained suspended in a state of limbo, feeling like they were sinking deeper into the darkness of the unknown. The waiting became unbearable. Each new day without any word from Shannon felt like an eternity. A few days after Shannon's disappearance, her husband Joshua suddenly informed the police that he had found her cell phone at home, in the pocket of a pair of pants lying in the bedroom. This was the first red flag that made detectives start questioning whether things were as simple as they first seemed. Moreover, Joshua revealed that he had discovered her car parked just a short distance from the house. These findings were handed over to the authorities, but no signs of a violent crime or struggle were found. For almost 2 weeks, Shannon's family and friends were stuck in a tense state of limbo, anxiously waiting for any news. Then, 2 strange photographs surfaced, landing in the hands of investigators. The pictures, taped to trees in one of Calgary's parks, showed a red-haired woman with her face obscured by her hair. This sent a wave of alarm through everyone involved. The resemblance to Shannon was too striking to ignore. Both the police and her family were shocked. It seemed like someone was deliberately toying with them, perhaps a kidnapper or a disturbed individual trying to mock their suffering. In response, authorities decided to launch a large-scale search operation in Big Creek Park, one of Canada's largest nature reserves. Several teams were assembled, including not just law enforcement officers, but also volunteers. Among the searchers were Shannon's family members, including her husband Joshua, who hadn't lost hope of finding her alive. Search dogs specially trained for such missions were brought in, and even a helicopter was used to scan the vast area from above. For 2 days, the search teams combed through the park, meticulously scanning every inch of ground, hoping to find any clue that could lead them to Shannon. But all efforts turned up empty. Soon, it was revealed that the photographs, initially thought to be connected to the case, were actually part of an art project created by local college students. Once the students realized the unintended impact of their work, they came forward to the police to explain the misunderstanding. This revelation was a crushing blow to Shannon's family and the investigators, who had hoped these images would provide a vital lead. Once again, they were left with nothing, back to the frustrating uncertainty and despair. Meanwhile, Shannon's parents and husband remained in constant agony, waiting for news each day, trapped in fear and grief. With every passing day, the situation grew more unbearable, and more questions piled up. Would they find Shannon alive? If they did, what condition would she be in? And most terrifying of all, how would they cope if they found out she was no longer alive? While the theory of abduction seemed unlikely, no one had contacted the family to demand a ransom. They didn't rule it out completely. In their desperation, they clung to any possible explanation for her disappearance, even though deep down, they feared the worst. With each passing day, the chances of finding Shannon alive seemed to dwindle. Then, sometime later, Joshua shared a disturbing incident with the police, something he had kept to himself until that moment. He revealed that a few months earlier, Shannon had called him in a state of distress, telling him she wanted to jump off a bridge. This happened after yet another failed audition that she had pinned her hopes on. Joshua recalled how close she had come to a breaking point that day, but he had managed to calm her down. Now he couldn't help but wonder, could those old emotional wounds have reopened? Detectives took Joshua's story seriously and began searching the bodies of water in and around the city. Given that there were several large bridges in the area, with divers and search teams, they scoured every river and lake, hoping to find any clue. But each day ended in disappointment. There were no signs, no traces, nothing to suggest where Shannon could be. By May 2015, nearly 6 months had passed since Shannon's disappearance, but the police still had no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence to shed light on her fate. Law enforcement officers began to fear the worst, suspecting that Shannon might no longer be alive, though they refrained from officially informing the family to spare them from even more heartache. The situation reached a critical point, prompting seasoned detective Christine White to take over the investigation. With over a decade of experience in homicide investigations, Christine was known for her determination and her keen attention to the smallest details. Thanks to her, dozens of dangerous criminals had been put behind bars, and now she was ready to tackle this case. Christine decided to start with those closest to Shannon, as she knew that in such cases, the culprit is often someone within the victim's inner circle. The first person she chose to interview was Joshua. He appeared to be open and cooperative, had worked with the police from the start, and had even allowed them to search the house twice. He had always answered their questions without hesitation. Joshua was also present when Shannon's family first reported her missing to the police, and he maintained a close relationship with them. Shannon's family never doubted his innocence for a second. However, despite the family's trust in Joshua, Christine noticed a few subtle inconsistencies in their stories, and this is where the full investigation began to unfold. On June 2nd, 2015, 7 long months after Shannon's disappearance, Detective Christine White, along with a team of officers, arrived at Joshua Burgess's home. This time, they came with warrants to search the premises, seize his phone, and impound Shannon's car. It was a turning point in the investigation, and Christine sensed that everything was about to come together. But when they knocked on the door, Joshua didn't answer right away. The detectives only heard his muffled voice saying he'd be out soon. He was stalling, and this delay made the situation all the more suspicious. Christine knew time was working against her. She felt an increasing sense of urgency, suspecting that Joshua was trying to hide something or buy himself precious seconds. The officers insisted he open the door immediately, not giving him the time to find his pants. Finally, when Joshua did open the door, they were ready for anything, even if force would be needed. But what they encountered was unexpected. Joshua stood there in tears and said, "I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who ended Shannon's life." His face was a mix of horror and despair, as if this confession was his last hope for some sort of relief. But to understand what led to this moment, we need to rewind several months to where it all began. At the time of Shannon's disappearance, she and Joshua had only been married for 7 months, but their relationship was already on the brink. After Shannon went missing, the investigation revealed that the couple had an open marriage, something even her family was aware of. This arrangement was Joshua's idea, and while he claimed Shannon agreed to it, it didn't bring her any real happiness. In theory, their marriage allowed both of them to have physical relationships with other people, but for Shannon, it was more of a concession than something she genuinely wanted. Investigators learned that Joshua was actively seeing other women, and Shannon knew about it. In fact, she had even met some of his partners, and according to Joshua, didn't object. But things began to shift when Shannon expressed her desire to return to a more traditional relationship. She realized she no longer wanted to share her husband with other women and gave him an ultimatum. Joshua agreed to her terms, but it turned out his agreement wasn't entirely sincere. Not long after, Shannon noticed that Joshua had put a password on his phone, something he hadn't done before. This raised her suspicions, and feeling uneasy, she asked for access to his device. Joshua gave her the password, but when she looked through his messages, she discovered that he was still seeing one of his previous partners despite their agreement. Worse, in his texts with this woman, he was discussing plans to divorce Shannon, saying he intended to make this other woman his primary partner. This revelation devastated Shannon. She felt deeply betrayed, and after throwing the phone down, she began to think about her next steps. Shannon decided she needed a fresh start and planned to move from Calgary to Edmonton. At the time of her disappearance, she was already in the process of relocating. Although they were still living under the same roof, she and Joshua had arranged their schedules to avoid crossing paths. Shannon was performing at night as a stand-up comedian, while Joshua worked during the day. Their relationship had grown cold and tense. Detectives discovered that Shannon's last known activities ended abruptly on November 27, 2014. That was the last day she made any bank transactions, used her phone, or had any presence online. Her phone's signal was traced to a city alley the next morning, after which Joshua claimed he found it at home. This statement immediately raised suspicions among the police. During further questioning, Joshua continued to insist that he had accidentally found Shannon's phone and car, but he failed to explain how exactly this had happened. His statements grew more inconsistent, and Detective Christine White decided to focus on him as the main suspect. The police filed requests to seize Joshua's phone and Shannon's car, but at that point, there wasn't enough evidence to obtain the necessary warrants. Their hopes rested on a judge's decision to approve their actions. When the warrants were finally granted, Christine and her team returned to Joshua's house. They knew they had caught him off guard and were prepared for anything, aware that he might try to hide evidence or even flee. But when Joshua finally opened the door, events took an unexpected turn. Now let's take a closer look at this critical moment. Standing before the officers, Joshua, with tears streaming down his face, confessed to the crime. His voice trembled, and it seemed like he was barely holding himself together. As Christine entered the house, she noticed an army knife lying on the floor, and Joshua himself was covered in blood. He had attempted to harm himself by cutting his neck, but fortunately, he hadn't hit any major arteries. Paramedics quickly transported him to the hospital, and his life was no longer in danger. After recovering from his attempt at self-harm, Joshua was sent for a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether he posed a risk to himself or others. Even at this point, there were still many unanswered questions about what had really happened that fateful night, and why he had chosen such a desperate course of action. Imagine someone who appeared to be doing everything possible to find his missing wife. He cooperated with the police, participated in search efforts, and seemed genuinely concerned for her family. But what if, all along, he had been lying and hiding a horrifying truth? This is the story of Joshua Burgess and Shannon Medill, a story in which every action and every gesture was part of a carefully crafted plan to conceal a terrible crime. When Joshua finally sat in the interrogation room, all he could say was, "If I could see Shannon again, I'd tell her how much I love her." The police gave him the night to collect himself before continuing with the questioning. During that time, search teams with dogs began combing through his property. By morning, they had found Shannon's body, buried under layers of debris and dirt in the backyard. The forensic team conducted an exhumation, enough evidence to charge him, but the detectives wanted to hear the full truth from Joshua himself. A top interrogation expert was brought in. On the second day of his arrest, Joshua finally started talking. While his initial confession and the discovery of Shannon's body were already sufficient for formal charges, his account was crucial to understanding what had truly happened between him and Shannon and how the situation had spiraled into tragedy. The police knew that only through his confession could Shannon's family learn the truth about her final moments. Joshua recounted how, on that fateful day, he came home to find Shannon sitting on the couch. She immediately began accusing him of infidelity, calling him a traitor for his affairs. Her words were sharp, and she was yelling. At some point, Joshua tried to silence her by covering her mouth with his hand, but Shannon broke free, bit him, and continued hurling insults, saying she was disgusted by his touch. In a fit of rage, Joshua grabbed her by the neck and began to strangle her, not stopping until she stopped breathing. When he realized Shannon was no longer alive, he panicked. He tried to revive her, but when that failed, he couldn't bring himself to call for medical help. According to his confession, he didn't want anyone to know what had happened. Joshua admitted that for 8 months, he lived with this lie, concealing his crime. He kept Shannon's body near the house, first in a container and later burying it in the backyard. The police had searched the house twice before but had missed the hidden containers on the back porch. Joshua had intentionally concealed them with trash bags to avoid suspicion. In his twisted reasoning, he chose that spot to bury her because he didn't want his beloved to leave him, even in death. Shannon's family finally learned the truth. They were horrified to realize that Joshua, who had been by their side all along, not only participated in the search efforts, but had been deceiving them the entire time. 2 years after these events, the trial began, drawing widespread media attention. Reporters closely followed every development in the case. Initially, Joshua faced life in prison for second-degree murder. He admitted to the crime, claiming he hadn't intended to end Shannon's life. that it had happened in the heat of the moment. Throughout the trial, his defense team fought for the possibility of parole after just 10 years, a prospect that came as a deep shock to Shannon's family, who believed his actions were entirely premeditated. Interrogations revealed many details that helped piece together the tragic events. On the day Shannon disappeared, an argument between her and Joshua escalated. In an attempt to reconcile, Joshua suggested they be intimate, but Shannon refused. He tried to persuade her, but she responded by saying she regretted ever marrying him. This remark sent Joshua into a rage. He lunged at her, grabbed her by the throat, and started strangling her. When his hands grew tired, he reached for a belt and finished what he had started. Once he realized what he had done, Joshua made a makeshift coffin out of a plastic container where he kept Shannon's body in the backyard until the spring, when the ground thawed and he was able to bury it. Despite the cold, Shannon's remains had undergone significant decomposition. Experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. There were no other injuries, which supported Joshua's account. However, despite his confession, Joshua refused to attend the court hearings, stating that he couldn't bear to face Shannon's family. Her relatives believed he was simply too cowardly to confront them. Ultimately, the judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Shannon's family was outraged by this decision, believing that someone who had committed such a terrible crime didn't deserve even the slightest chance at freedom. They argued that his lifestyle and deceit had led to this tragedy and that he had tried to avoid accountability at every turn. Recently, Joshua filed for parole. Shannon's family plans to attend the parole board hearing to remind the court and the public of the dangers of releasing the man responsible for her death. What do you think? Should someone who so cruelly deceived everyone and took his wife's life be given a chance at freedom? Can regret and remorse ever erase the pain he caused?